Hey everybody, Dr. Jensen with CCJ 3701, Research Methods in Criminology. So I've learned over teaching this class for 8 years that I cannot stress enough how important it is to look at sample papers and really see kind of what you're going to be making to be able to wrap your head around it. So that's something I'm doing today. I'm back in Turlington Hall working on this recording for you. So I have a sample paper up from a student that I worked with many years ago. I'm using this paper with permission as a good sample to use. So we're going to go over kind of a high level version of the paper first so you can see it. And so just kind of take a seat back and kind of take it all in, soak it all up at first. And then in the second part of the video, I'm going to show you more of the detail of the sections and how they get written with some tips and strategies that'll help you start creating yours. And that's where you're probably going to want to take some notes. So if you need to for that part of the video, and I'll try to warn you and remind you, you might want to get some paper and a pencil out or have your laptop ready to type up a few things on another screen. Okay, so here we are. Sorry, I'm still a little bit ill. But here we are again with just the overall paper. Let me make an even larger view of this so you can see what the whole thing looks like when you're done. So when you see this thing, it almost looks kind of intimidating, staring at all these pages that need to be written miraculously almost overnight. That's not what's going to happen. So I'll tell you, when you write a paper like this, you kind of write it in sections. And sometimes you start from the back and go to the front, and other times you start at the front and go to the back. Kind of goes into that inductive, deductive reasoning that we talked about in this semester on how you approach it. What we're going to do is, here's the overall paper, and I'll kind of walk you through the sections. So you have a title page here on the very far left. You will have a title page as well. Your title doesn't have to be fancy, just something that helps us know what your topic is, and that's it. And again, I'll try to make some of these templates available so you can drop your stuff in it so you don't have to mess with formatting too much. Okay, your second page here is your abstract. So hopefully you've started drafting this by now. I know it's going to be incomplete. That's okay. But your abstract would be on page 2. Then you have a couple pages of what we call introduction. Okay, so these next few pages are basically your writing about your topic and the articles that are relevant to your topic that we need to be familiar with in order to understand your study and learn why it's important to be answering your research question. Okay, so a few pages of that. We scroll down, and about halfway through the page, a little less than that, we start with a theory section. You're not going to have a very large theory section, but you will have a section of it. So it's a little over a page maybe. It's not a lot of writing, okay? It just goes from there to there, where you propose your explanation of how your topics work together and what could be going on in that situation. Okay? Finally, we get to data and methods. So in this section, this is the methodology section. There's a couple things we're going to be accomplishing here. First, you describe the data you're using. Now, for everyone in this class, you're going to be using data somebody else collected, meaning you need to go to the code book or the study site or, the summaries of the study in order to determine how they got their data. You're going to write a brief paragraph of how they did that. Did they do phone interviews? Did they do hard copy surveys? How did they collect all this information? A little bit about how they got the sample, who's in the sample, how'd they get that. Okay, so again, just a few paragraphs and sentences describing how the data came to be. And then later on, you start writing about your variables. Okay, so you should have a paragraph on your independent variable that says, this is my independent variable, this is my topic, this is the question or topic that was presented to the person, these are the potential responses they could have given, and just describe what was in there. Okay, and then you kind of move on to your dependent variable, and you discuss that. So this is where you actually list out how things are organized so the reader can understand it once you start presenting it to them. And you can also list out any control variables you're going to use. Okay, so just a few paragraphs actually describing in English each variable that you've chosen for your study. Also in this section is this funky looking little guy. This is your figure. Okay, now this is a kind of a more complicated figure. Yours probably won't be nearly this spidery looking, but you will have a figure that starts to illustrate which concepts which, with arrows and circles kind of in a diagram helping the reader understand all of the pieces together at once. Okay? And we've already started to draft that a little bit. And again, you can mess with it as your topic evolves. Okay? When you're done with that, you've described all your variables and all the pieces in there, then we start going to tables. Okay? So you have a table here, and you have tables here. Okay? So these little pieces are what we call descriptive tables. Descriptive tables just do that very thing. They describe the variables that you just presented in writing. So it says, okay, I told you what my variables were. Let's actually see what's in here. So these are things like frequencies and means and medians and modes. You know how to run those. So you just start to present the data that you would see in SPSS in a table format so your reader can get to know it. Now, I remind people of this all the time. Your reader does not have your data. They do not have SPSS. They're completely blind. So you have to describe and show everything you're doing in SPSS to your reader so they can follow what's going on, because they don't have any of that. Okay, it's easy to take that for granted when you have all those tools and they don't, and go, oh yeah, you guys wouldn't know that unless I showed you the frequency. Okay? So again, just some more tables, and I'll talk to you about tables in another video so we can start putting those together. Then eventually, again, this is just more description on the control variables being used. Eventually we get to a section here called hypotheses. This is where we get to make predictions about how we think our variables are going to perform. Whether or not they're going to be related, maybe that something's going to be a greater or lesser effect for one group over another, or that this is going to increase or this will decrease. You can make any prediction you want as to how you think your variables are going to perform. Okay, and I just ask that you make 5 predictions. That's it. And we have a whole section that we talk about how to write those. Then you have results. So right underneath all your predictions, you say, okay, and those are all my predictions. Here's all my variables. Let's go run the tests in SPSS and see what we find. So then you have this table here, which is what we call a regression results table. So this shows all those little pieces you've been learning about in the last 2 weeks. Coefficients, R-squareds, significance levels, or odds ratios, and all those kind of things. And it shows how each variable worked and which ones were significant, which ones were not. Okay? Then, below that, you actually write up in a few paragraphs what all that stuff means. So my strategy I give students is I tell them, run all your analyses and make your results table first, then go back, and then you can kind of close SPSS. You don't have to scroll through output forever. All your results are in your table. You're ready to go. Now you can actually start writing up paragraphs in English of what those little pieces mean. And before you know it, you have several paragraphs of stuff you can talk about in your paper of what you found out and what mattered, what didn't, and how it mattered. At the very end, we are here with discussion. Okay? So now that you know what you know, what do you do next? So you kind of unpack all the things you just found out, relating it back to the front of the paper on how your findings now contribute to the research on this, how to use the results in some way. Is it going to help us form policy? You know, what's it going to do? Should we change how we go about doing this topic? Are we focusing on the wrong things because there's really no evidence for that? So you get to kind of unpack everything you just learned in a couple pages. And here you also talk about your hypotheses and how your predictions did. And it's okay to be wrong. You can say, you know what, I thought it was going to go this way. It turns out it actually went that way. And that's fine. Okay, so you don't have to be right in all your predictions. It's perfectly normal to be wrong sometimes. Okay, you can also talk about any results that were kind of surprising to you or that you didn't expect, things that you maybe wish you could have done. In the very end, we have a conclusion section where we kind of wrap things up, where we say, okay, so this is what my whole study was about. This is what we learned. These are weaknesses and strengths of my study and how it did. This is what I would do differently next time. And it's very common to say I had less than ideal data. I really wish I would have had variables about this. Or, you know, maybe maybe I didn't have, you know, the best methods because people don't talk about this stuff in interviews very often or in this kind of format. Maybe a pencil paper survey would have been better. So you get to kind of go into the pros and cons of how your data worked or how your study worked or things like that. And then the last few pages are references, okay? You only are required to have 6 references in this paper. So these papers that I wrote with students, were much, much longer. So you're probably only going to have 1 page of references, and then you're done. Essentially, you'll have probably a 15 to maybe 20-page paper at the most, including all your tables and stuff. I tell people, don't think about length right now. Think about content, because your paper is just going to kind of flesh itself out. Don't think too much about trying to fill up 15 pages worth of stuff. That's not really the point. The point is to get all the right pieces in place. Okay, so that's a bird's eye view of the paper, how it's starting to come together. Now let's take some notes and go into detail into these sections so you can start making your plan of what you're going to do. So I'm going to zoom in to 200%. Okay, so again, title page, pretty straightforward. We already talked about that. The abstract. So again, make sure you use the how to write an abstract document so you fulfill all those components, because that's what I'm using to grade you from. Okay, making sure that I know what your topic is. I know a brief statement about your data and your methods, a little bit about what you found, and then also a little bit about what to do with it. Okay, as long as you meet those 4 criteria, you'll be fine. In the intro, this is a part where students often struggle because it's hard to know how to start this darn thing. You're like, oh, how do I get people interested in my topic? How did you get interested in it? So there is room for a brief story here. When I say brief, I mean maybe like a paragraph at the most. Okay, or you can put in some interesting stats, or maybe some mentions of phenomena that have happened lately that should be on people's radar. So there's all kinds of ways to do it. I call hooking your audience. Okay, trying to hook them into your topic, generate that interest and a reason to keep reading. Okay, so I thought this was kind of an interesting way that this student started their paper. It says the average American is expected to relocate 11.7 times throughout their lifetime. I was like, wow, we move 11 times on average? That's actually quite a bit more than I expected. So right there, I'm kind of intrigued. Oh, that's interesting. So you can take all kinds of stats and do that. You can say, well, when I worked in a prison, this is something I saw. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so again, a story, a statistic, or phenomena that's kind of current can often get people interested in the first few sentences. Okay, then we start weaving in the research. Well, this is what we know about people that move, and these are some of the factors that matter. These are some of the things that are risky about it. These are the things that are rewarding about it. And again, weaving in those articles that start to make your point of the things you want to say. In paragraph 1, you can also introduce some questions about things that you're wondering about and let the reader wonder with you. Like, how does moving actually affect people? And, general effects of moving could be family tension and stress and anger. Problem behavior might also happen. So you're kind of suggesting a need to know. And then eventually, somewhere in your first paragraph, you want to mention your research question. So essentially, this question for this student was, does residential relocation correlate with juvenile delinquency? Or how does moving impact being a delinquent? Okay. And then right here, they say there's an ongoing debate when it comes to moving and delinquency. Does it increase delinquency? Does it decrease it? Do you move away from the bad kids, or do you move to the bad kids? Or does the moving process create that anxiety and tension that makes you want to do naughty things? So here you start kind of having that dialogue. Okay. Again, weaving in the articles and the research that are relevant to the things you want to say. So one little strategy I use here is I kind of also do a brain dump where I kind of just blurt out all the topics that seem relevant, things I'd want to mention, things I'd want to discuss, and I just kind of dump it on paper or into my phone and record myself or out loud to a friend. And then I jot everything down, and then I can actually take those concepts and kind of weave them together and start to build a little bit of an outline of things I want to say, and I can make decisions about when to say them or whether to ditch them, what to spend time on, what to just mention. So it starts to get me kind of going with things I want to say and do. Okay. If you want a sample of an intro, look at any journal article you've ever read for a class. And those first few paragraphs should be a perfect template to look at, to say, this is what we know about this topic. This is what we don't know. This is where we need more research in this area. You're making a case for your study. So it's really, really important to do that. And I'll continue in part 2. of this video.